Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Aspen Institute Financial Security Program webcast, live webcast about that are struggling, but also importantly, what's the world we want to build, the future of higher education and post-secondary learning that won't saddle young people and adults with this kind of debt. We are so thrilled you guys are joining us. There are hundreds and hundreds of you around the country viewing. And this is an important topic. It's everywhere in the news. Every single day, our team is getting inundated with articles about this. So what are we going to do about it? We know it's 1.5 trillion in current debt. We know that number keeps growing as people go back to school. So today we're going to dig deep into how do we solve this problem for now, and where's the world going, and what is the frontier about how we solve this for the future. So thank you so much for joining us. Feel free to chat with us via Twitter, to email us about it, and to just keep in touch if you're interested in this topic. So I'm going to turn to my panel today. This first panel is about the now. The now is where we have too many young people and older people. This is actually a wide range of folks, cross age and where you are in your life cycle, struggling with student debt. We need to understand who these folks are. I think it's not exactly who we think about they are in our mind, because that's how we plan the kinds of solutions that can scale and that can really serve Americans best. I have the most amazing panel with me here, viewers from around the country. First to my left is Adam Ordaz, who's part of the Young Invincibles Young Advocate Program, and he hails from Houston, Texas, a very proud Texan. And yes. Houstonian?
Yes, Houstonian.
Houstonian, I got that right. Next to him is Dan Rosenzweig. I think I did good job with your last name. He's the president and CEO of Chegg, which is the largest educational tech company. Many of you who might be students right now probably know Dan and that company and product well. And finally, all the way down, last but not least, is a colleague and friend, Marlon Sullivan, who's the divisional VP of Human Resources at Abbott. And Abbott is a private sector company doing some really important innovation around student loan debt repayment for employees. So I want to get into it. I've wasted too much time babbling myself here. Let's talk about this problem. Tell me who is hurting the most. Like, let's try to debunk some myths. Let's truth talk, hashtag truth talk, folks, about what is actually happening in this country and who is suffering. Dan, I know your company just did some really important research about your own users to understand this problem better, and I'm wondering if you might share with us. The paper came out last week. We blasted it out. I believe it's on our website, viewers.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, it is actually super important. Like, I've been doing this work on student loan debt for years, and I read it and was like, oh my gosh, there's stuff I didn't get, right? So it challenged my own sense of what's happening in the world. So talk to me, like what did you guys see in that? What was surprising to you? Help us all understand better what this problem is looking like for real in the real lives of people.
Yeah, so let me just start by your first question, which is framing who is a student.
Yeah, thank you.
So about 70% of students go to state schools. The average age of a college student or higher education student today is about 25 years old.
Okay.
That 25% of all students currently today actually have a child on their own. 40% of them are working over 30 hours a week while they're going to school full time.
Yep.
Of the 50% of high school students that move on to college, 43% of them never graduate.
Yeah.
And of those that do, 40% of them are in jobs that didn't require a degree.
Okay.
So this is sort of the universe. Everybody understands it's more women than men, and by 2022, 25% of the college population, English will be their second language. It doesn't mean they won't be proficient in English. It'll just give you an indication of immigration and diversity that is coming up through our system, which is what makes America healthy.
Right.
And so that's who they are.
Okay.
The online student is actually even older. The online student is generally 30, generally a woman with a job and a child,
Yep.
and generally somebody who's trying to get back into the workforce or increase the amount of money they make because some event just happened in their life.
Okay.
So this is America's student population, if you will.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, let's go to the question of who's suffering.
Yeah.
The question of who's suffering is the United States of America. And what I mean by that is you mentioned it's $1.6 trillion in debt. 44 million Americans hold debt today.
Yeah.
40% of those that hold debt are technically in default. I think 90% of all student loan comes from the government. And it's the only debt in this country that you can't declare bankruptcy on.
Right. It
So
sticks with you.
Right, so it sticks with you. So what the survey really revealed, those economic numbers are devastating enough.
Right.
Right, we're creating an entire generation of a permanent debtor class. And what we learned from that, though, was how it negatively impacts the rest of their lives and our economies, our companies, our culture. So what's happening? 1/3 across the income spectrum, doesn't matter wealthy or not wealthy, that have debt, they are missing payments and other things. So we're having the greatest amount of auto default loans that we've ever had before. We're having higher credit card debt than we ever had before. Because you can't write this debt off,
Right.
people are borrowing money from their credit card at 21% to pay off debt at 6%. So we are literally extending this debt forever, and it's credit card roulette. I'll take it from this one to take it to this one to take it
It's
for
like
this
robbing
one.
Peter to pay Paul.
So what's happening is we've got the highest amount of mental health issues. We've got the highest amount of college suicides. We've got the highest amount of depression and anxiety. And so this is what we're doing to the future of this country. We're creating a debtor class who has stress, anxiety, who are forced to get jobs that they don't want or not in the majors that they have in order to pay off this debt. And for what benefit? The goal was to get you into the middle class. Instead, we're destroying the middle class.
That's meant to be
my
economic
description.
ability.
We have solutions we could talk about
Yeah,
later.
we will get to the solutions. Thank you. That was like, I mean, for one thing, when I hear you talk, Dan, it's like, oh, okay, so the average college student is no longer nor will be the 18-year-old young person who's going to school for 4 years and finishing in 4 years and has their parents somehow helping them. And so the kinds of financial products and supports they need that looked like that for that more traditional.
Only 20% of students.
That's right.
This, I want to eliminate the fact that we call that traditional
That's
education.
exactly, well, that's what I was just about to
isn't.
say. That is not even a norm, let alone traditional, let alone the majority, and yet we have a system, a set of supports, and
It's
the
for very
financial
wealthy
products
people, and
that are
that's it.
set up for a whole different kind of student.
Correct.
Marlon, I want to get you into the conversation here too. I wonder if you have some reactions to Dan's survey, his users, the folks that he's closest with, and how does that compare to what you know about kind of who's been struggling with student loan debt that are employees of Abbott that you guys have been trying to work with?
Yeah, and let me start with the most important idea that I'd like to share.
Please.
Which is saving for your retirement and paying off your student debt does not have to be mutually exclusive.
Right.
In fact, if you're able to do both of those, you can live a fulfilling life. But here's part of the challenge, and Dan hit on some of it.
Yeah.
42% of working adults who have debt haven't even started, nor do they plan to work on retirement savings.
Right.
And if that happens, you're behind, you're playing catch-22.
Yeah.
You'll never get caught up.
That's right.
So part of what we've launched at Abbott is this program called Freedom to Save.
Yeah, and we'll get into the details of that, but I
Right.
want to sit on who are the folks, yeah.
Right, but the only point I was making is that the program has been launched. We started with 300 employees. We're approaching now 1,000. I only share that to underscore the enormity of the challenge.
Thank you.
And the importance of having programs like that
Yeah.
that will help. When we take a look at those who are part of that program today, the average debt they're carrying is $47,000. That is significant for us.
That's beyond student debt, though.
That is the student debt.
Just the
that
student
is
debt.
just the student debt that they're carrying on average, $47,000. And what we also find is a large majority of those are below the age of 35. Another 10% are above the age of 45.
Interesting.
So to both of your points, this is not unique to those who are just graduating.
Right.
This is really across the spectrum and various demographics as well.
Well, and to your point, 5 million Americans over the age of 50 still carry student debt.
That's right. I mean, think about that in comparison to our readiness as a country for an entire generation of older Americans. Are we going to take care of folks, right? Like, how are these people actually prepared for what is their future health cost retirement? Well, of course not. But this becomes a much bigger, Dan, I think in the beginning of the conversation, your description was such a good case making of why we have to care about this problem from a macro level. Right. And this piece that you bring in, Marlon, which is so critical about like the retirement security obligations, policies that will be needed to help a whole generation of older Americans and a large generation, because we're talking a lot about millennials that are slowly aging, and they are a huge generation of like physical people, right? Is going to be beyond what our country is capable right now to support. Adam, talk to us as the, oh my goodness, my papers are flying everywhere, folks, viewers at home. If you wouldn't mind telling us your experience, you're a student right now. You've also been an advocate around these issues, so you're like our perfect person to be on this panel. And hashtag Truth Talk with us.
Yeah. Hashtag Chegg customer.
Yeah,
Definitely.
hashtag Chegg customer, hashtag Truth Talk, hashtag I coined Truth Talk, just kidding.
Hashtag, can we stop using hashtag?
We could. I could stop showing my age by doing that, viewers at home. Like, get into this.
Yeah,
like, tell me about your life, your experience. What are your friends experiencing? I just love for you to really personalize this about what's going on.
Definitely. You know, when I heard Dan speaking and a lot of what he was saying, a lot of those points that he was making really resonated with me. And just to share some of my experiences, you know, I am a first-generation student trying to navigate himself through our higher education system here in the U.S. As well from that, I guess you could call it now the traditional student, because you know, I do have to work around 30-something hours a week to support myself as well. You know, there are things that come not only with school or college, but there are things like bills like paying food, paying gas, paying my insurance, paying my light bill, just paying different things. You know, your phone.
You have to live. Right.
You know, there's so much more than just school. There is a whole set of responsibilities that you know, we have to worry about. And like I said, you know, I am a first generation student here trying to navigate through this. And it's been something that, you know, it's been an additional stressor to not just go through the school, you know, the whole education process, but as well with other things that come in life. You know, with that, I believe I've seen a lot of people, like Dan mentioned, there's a lot of student parents that I see as well who are trying to get their education as well. There are more and more people who are parents who have kids already, who are trying to get themselves better to give their kids a better life. And you know, I started seeing that that population of student parents increase over the past couple of years, as well as other non-traditional students who, like
now
me,
are traditional,
now
right?
are traditional.
We are changing the understanding.
Exactly, who are more traditional, I guess, like Dan mentioned, who are there, like myself, who is working 30 plus hours plus school, who, you know, I'm taking 6 classes, and so I got my plate full, plus I got to work in order to make ends meet. And so, you know, that's some of the experiences that I feel a lot in my community as well are having to face.
Can I ask you a question, Adam? We heard Marlon bring up, which I'm so glad you did, especially as the financial security program, these issues around retirement savings. And Dan talked about impacts about just sort of spiraling to other debt because of this debt. I'm wondering, what are you worried about not being able to do because of student loan debt? Like, where do you think this will stop some of your future goals?
Some of my future goals that I think will really just hinder me because of student debt is pursuing what I want. Just recently, I had to turn down an opportunity to really work on something I've been wanting to do in Houston, which is to really help with transportation. But unfortunately, because I wasn't able to afford the amount of pay that they were giving me, they're like, you will only be able to give you this much. I unfortunately wasn't able to. So I am not being able to work in the work that I'm wanting to do, and the work that I'm studying to do. I think
you mentioned too, Dan.
Yeah, definitely. And so that is one of the biggest inhibitors, as well as, you know, I know y'all mentioned on using credit cards to pay for school. I myself personally had to use that because I had no other option. It was either...
So you're borrowing money at 21%.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right.
And, you know, I had no other option than to do you know, credit cards.
How many credit card payments have you missed, or only done the minimum? This is what's happening.
Many. I have.
Wow, we're having a real truth talk moment, guys.
Definitely.
But this is
hashtag back on.
reality.
Well, you told me to not put the hashtag back on.
Putting the hashtag
no, but
back
thank
on.
you for being so honest, Adam. I mean, this is what's happening. This is the real experience at a household level. This is obviously harming you, creating stress, hurting the choices you can make. But at a country level, it's like add up all the atoms in the country, of which now this is the norm. And what is that doing to, like, what is the lost potential at a country level? The lost economic potential, the lost, like, realization of our own creativity and innovation, which is what this country is about.
So
and then we have to get to solutions.
We can get in a lot of different ways about the spin out, but if we just focus on the economic one for a minute, the emotional one, this adds to the opioid crisis, depression, anxiety, all the things that we said. It actually, but if we talk about the economic one, young people his age who are doing everything right are delaying marriage. They're delaying having children. They're not getting cars. They're not buying things. They can't afford to live. Honestly, his credit score is not going to be great. And so as a result of that, he can't even rent a place to live. So he has to pay very high, and he has to pay lots of money in advance.
We're using poor Adam as a proxy.
So
I believe your credit score will be perfect and you'll be fine. But I understand your point, Dan. Yeah, but I understand your point.
So if we just look at it economically, 40% of the debt is not being paid today. So that's destruction of value. Credit scores are being destroyed not just for now, but forever. So there'll be no ability for them to buy assets or create wealth in their time, real estate and other things.
Or those things will cost more for them.
Well, they won't. It doesn't matter if they cost more. They can't get them because there won't be enough money because you know what they're doing? They're paying $5,000 a year to pay down debt to interest. And they're paying that after taxes, and then they're paying an interest rate on it. So they're getting double taxed on what should be American families lending to other American families should be interest-free. And it could be, if we did it right, if more people paid back. And the way you do that, we'll have solutions later. But what the economic destruction is, go the other way. If we can reduce this burden on young people, think about the money that will go into their pockets that can go towards retirement savings, go towards home ownership, go towards building families, go towards consumption. It will be the biggest economic boon this country has seen because we're going to put money in the hands of the people that need to spend it.
Well, I was
so
going to give just a real life example.
And then I want to move to solutions, but please add in.
A real life example. I think Adam's been gracious in sharing about his personal experiences, but there are many Adams around the world that are, particularly in the U.S., that are dealing with a similar challenge. And I'll just take one. We currently have hundreds of employees on the program I mentioned earlier. There's one young individual that we know very, very well within Abbott, Rarity Monfort. She's in her 20s. She's a biomedical engineer. We hired her in Texas. She has $60,000 in debt. She works in our nutrition business, so she's doing phenomenal work. Complete and balanced nutrition for adults and for infants. But with $60,000 in debt, she has an $800 a month loan payment. In Texas, that could easily pay for rent.
That's like 2 car payments.
Absolutely right. So she happens to benefit from the program, but the challenge is literally Rarity is a rarity because this program doesn't exist many other places.
She does have an exceptionally awesome name.
And until we figure that out, until we figure it out,
this is a really good place to pivot from. Thanks, Marlon. I want to use the rest of our time inspiring our viewers out there on the leadership that we can take to do something about this. I mean, we have to, not just for Adam and Rarity. We have to because this is actually a huge crisis in our country for our own, thriving as a nation, our own prosperity, besides the moral imperative that sits here that I believe to be quite true. And at Aspen, we talk about values, right? Like this just isn't okay. But there's many reasons to solve this. I am loving what you guys are doing at Abbott. I want the world to know. So can you share just briefly about the program? And I think also I'd love to know why you guys are doing this, because it's a big deal. It's a big thing. And then Dan, I want to hear about what you guys are doing too. But let's start with you, Marlon.
Yeah, so the Freedom to Save program is a one-of-its-kind program. It's fairly straightforward. So for those employees who currently have debt, student debt, if they're willing to contribute 2% of their pay to paying off their debt, Abbott in turn generates and contributes 5% of their eligible pay into their 401k. And it's that simple. So for example, if Adam were to join Abbott today making $70,000, fast forward,
I would
say
yes.
Definitely.
Your job is done here. One
And we're
student at a
done.
time. Well done, my friend.
We could talk right after the panel, of course. But if he were to join today, let's say he was making $70,000 annually, fast forward 10 years, he'd have $55,000 in his 401k. And Adam will not have contributed one dime to
That's
that.
amazing. And he would have also managed his student loan debt.
Absolutely. At the age of 60, that's hundreds of thousands above whatever he would have saved otherwise.
And tell us, as like a private sector employer, why are you guys doing it? Like, is it the economics? Is it the moral piece of it? Just what about it had your leadership and you saying we have to do this?
There are several reasons, and it was strong alignment across the full leadership team at Abbott.
Yeah.
Number one, it's the right thing to do. At the end of the day, employees are the heartbeat of any organization.
That's right.
Investing in employees is one of the best, if not the best investment for a greater return. That's one.
Okay.
Number two is there's actually a payoff. So we have clearly seen stronger retention. We've seen the ability to attract stronger talent in terms of background and experiences into the organization. And we've done some calculations that would suggest for every dollar that we spend on this program, we've estimated up to $5 in return for us in cost avoidance. So you don't have to go out and recruit and rehire and retrain and reorient, et cetera. So we've done some of that math. And whether it's 1 to 5 or 1 to 3, the point is, depending on the role itself, it definitely pays for itself. So it's clearly a win-win.
Right. I mean, you started from a place that said, this isn't right for our workforce, our employees, our family, essentially.
Correct.
But got to a place that said, and this actually feels like a really strong business decision.
Absolutely.
And so super. Dan, I'm wondering if you'll share with us what you guys are doing at Chegg and how that model, similar or different to Marlon's. And maybe also I'd love to know kind of what sparked you're the CEO, you kind of decide if you're going to do something or not.
Yeah,
Why'd you do it?
If only it worked that way.
I know, you can decide everything. And when
That's
you
like saying I make
say
decisions at
Adam
home.
is hired, Adam is hired. So
Well, that I can do.
okay, good.
And
You have 2 job offers
There
now,
you
Adam.
go.
Yeah, that's a good day.
But he wants to live in Houston.
I know.
I can't help him with that. So for those people who don't know Chegg, 87% of students know us. 30 million students between high school and college use us for something. 12.5 million are registered with us and 6 million pay us for something. And so we go direct, so we have no choice but to listen and learn.
Yeah.
And when you listen to their voices, they're not asking for much. They're asking for opportunity, they're asking for access, and they're asking for a future because they were willing to take the time to invest in themselves to go learn something.
Yeah.
And so you get sort of excited about the future of America when you do that. I'm grandchild of immigrants. My mom was a public school teacher. My mother-in-law was the secretary at the deans at our high school. So this is sort of I grew up as without a dad. So I can't relate to the economically because my situation was different, but I can empathize with what the facts tell me. And then we really wanted to get into this debate and feel like we had an obligation to represent the voice of the student, not to tell them what to do.
Right.
That's not our right, but to listen to what they need. And Adam's a great example of that. And so when you hear that, we felt like we couldn't really enter the debate unless we put our money where our mouth is. And we had a great discussion with the leadership team and with the board of directors. And we said, what would it take to pay off all of our employee student debt?
Wow.
That's it. And how
many employees do you guys have?
Well, we have around the world 1,200. We have in the U.S. 600 and something. And so if we focus on domestically. And then the question was, how would we do it? And why we did what we did taught us what the problems are and what we're in Washington to try to fix, which is the tax system. So it turns out that companies like mine are tax incented by about $5,250 a year to pay for continuing education. But if I want to use that same dollar to pay off the education that you got, which caused me to want to hire you to begin with,
the job to begin
I
with,
can't do it.
Yeah.
Right? There's no tax incentive. So corporations are spending $53 billion a year in retraining. Well, what if we paid those that were trained? So we created something called Equity for Education. As a public company, we have a public stock. We know investors did not want us to use their stock to dilute them, so we contributed from our stock. And we said, we're going to allow those that make the least to get the highest benefit, $5,000 a year, directly towards their student loan. Those above a certain level, $3,000 a year. Nobody at the C level obviously gets it. We're older and don't need it. And we get paid a lot more. So it's not our challenge, but the challenge of our employees. And this is a way for people who are building our company to get benefit from having the stock appreciate and being able to get a raise,
Yep.
if you will. What we learned from that was that they get taxed as a benefit.
Right.
So for every dollar we give, 50 cents of it gets taxed by the government anyway, and then the government takes interest from the students. So we are advocating for changing the tax system to make it tax deductible for companies to do it. Advocate, incent companies to do it, we will do it, because it's the right thing to do, it's the moral thing to do, but what else are we doing? Healthcare costs go down, absenteeism goes
That's
down,
right?
Love for
those
the
help
company
your
goes up.
business, yeah.
People's willing to work harder, not longer hours, that's not the goal.
Right.
So our view is student first on the outside, family first on the inside. And so we now have over 100 of our employees registered in this program. We made our first significant payment. 3 people's loans are already paid off, which is wonderful.
Nice.
That is exciting.
But it's so our view is why so we put our money where our mouth is. We learn these things. We're here to advocate for changes in the tax system, which make this even more valuable.
Yeah.
If you incent corporations, they'll have hearts. Even if they want to do the right thing, we
you guys had a
can't.
different sort of tax issue because you're still putting the money
401k.
into retirement.
Right. So
Right.
they're
That's
doing
the
it a
benefit.
different way,
Right.
which was brilliant by
Yeah.
them. We
Yeah.
found our way to do this using
Right.
equity and then go through the system.
Yeah.
So what we are advocating for now is if corporations or businesses are more willing to invest in education, then the curriculum will become more relevant for what businesses in those local communities need. I'm not saying we should eliminate the academic stuff.
Right.
My daughters went to a liberal arts college. I went to a liberal arts college, but that's not for everybody. Most students, and I'm sure Adam will tell you, want to go from learning to earning as fast as they can. And so what we're advocating for is the ability to be able to add to the curriculum, make it more relevant for workplace skills. And by doing so, you'll have people better prepared that will get out faster, that will have less debt. It costs less to do. Much of it can be done online, frankly,
Yeah.
when it comes to tech-enabled jobs. And we're not talking about people becoming engineers. I'm not an engineer. My
Right.
daughters would never be an engineer. But you know what? There isn't a single job that doesn't require you to use Microsoft Office 360,
Yeah.
or a sales job that doesn't require you to use Salesforce, a creative job doesn't require.
Right.
We think once people learn those skills, they become much more employable, they get out much faster, and schools, whether we like it or not, they serve their master. And their master today is the United States government, because that's who funds them.
Right.
And the government has put no caps on them or no obligations on them and no graduation rates on them. And so it's become a scheme where they can raise their prices and give this young man even greater debt.
Right.
So anyway,
So
I can go on for a long time.
I
but
know.
I'm sure
Well,
you
this
got
is, listen,
others you want to
I
hear
could
from.
go on for a long time about this. This is such an important piece of it. I'm really thrilled that we've been able to get into the private sector side of what people can do, though in both scenarios, you need partners at the policy level to scale this, to make this possible, to make it more.
We are both going around the system
You're both duct
to
taping
make
the
it work for our
system.
employees.
That's right.
And the question is, why doesn't the system support this?
Right. So we have some
Right.
MacGyver solutions between what Abbott and what Chegg is doing, and that's important to test and to innovate. But it's also really great that our listeners, hello listeners, are hearing that private sector leadership, there's a role here. There's a really important place for them.
It's an obligation.
And
We should be
and
the
a moral
beneficiary of that
obligation.
education.
And I think your theory of change, of how we change the culture of the cost of education, is also about when employers, when the private sector sort of have a vested stake in it, they also can help shape what is there. I just
And
want
invest
Adam,
in it.
yeah, and invest in it as well. I want Adam to have our final word on this panel, so pressure's on, Adam. I just am wondering for you, I feel bad. We gave you all the stuff to talk about that felt down. But you are here, you're a leader, you're with the advocates, and you're trying to change the world, frankly. You're trying to change Houston, change Texas, change our country for you and for your peers. And for that, I'm grateful. And I want to also say that. But what policy are you most excited about? Like what would change your life? It doesn't have to be specific, like I want Elizabeth Warren's X. That's not what I'm here to say. It's really like, do you think the stuff that they're talking about is appealing and exciting? Is there something else you want your state to do? I'm just would love for you to come in on what do our Adams of the world, and to let you leave on a excited note of optimism.
Yeah, definitely. So, having started in college, I started at a community college, San Jacinto College in East End, Houston. After my first semester, I had to unfortunately drop because there was financial problems at home.
Yeah.
I had to take up a job at the age of, I believe it was 18, and work full time to help with the bills because there was no other way. It was either helping my parents pay for food or pay for the light.
And the school obligated you to come in at the same time. They force you to do earning over learning, whereas online doesn't force you to do that.
So it was a big issue. My first semester didn't know what to do. I unfortunately dropped. After a couple years later, I was fortunate enough to go back into school, but I still had no help. I didn't know how to navigate through, the higher education system. I didn't know how to ask for financial aid, to be frank. I didn't know what to do.
Right.
After a couple years, I accrued debt, and how they mentioned, it became a huge stressor. Even to this day, I still have the lingering thoughts of, I have a payment due in 2 days.
Yeah.
And I have to pay this, and I have like $10 in my account.
Yeah.
It's things like that we have experienced as our generation, as my peers.
Yeah.
There's those things that we really experience. And I think that has a huge, huge toll on our mental health. I was lucky enough to have health insurance through my parents, because luckily through the ACA, that extended up to the age of 26.
Right.
And so I was fortunate enough to have health insurance. What's even better than that is that I was able to seek mental health professional, and instead of paying hundreds of dollars per visit, I was able to pay $30.
Yeah.
And so the support that young people need these days is not just necessarily pour in, just give us money. It's not necessarily that.
Right.
It's resources. We have, like they mentioned, we have student parents who are struggling to pay bills and to take care of their family.
Yep.
We have other students who, like myself, are struggling to also pay their bills, trying to support themselves, but get a higher education, because that's what we need to do in order to leave the cycle of not making a lot of money.
Right.
And one of the biggest things, if there's anybody out there who can do any kind of influence or just any change.
Oh, there's people out there that can do something.
Is to consider the following. People my age and peers really need help with mental health. It has become a huge thing of where no matter what you're trying to do, if you cannot think straight, if there's lingering problems in your mind about other stressors, about you have anxiety about other things, people go through depression, unfortunately. That is a huge, huge impediment from actually succeeding and achieving what we need to do.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you. I really appreciate you kind of closing us in on these. People don't live in a silo, and these interactions between our financial health and our mental health, and frankly, the policies of the ACA with policies around student loan debt, we can't solve as if we all have one problem, but we have whole lives that we have to solve for. So this is complicated. We hit on it's like a taste of how to solve for student loan debt. But I am grateful for all three of your leadership, truly, for coming here and talking to us. And to all of our viewers out there, please stay on the line. We are about to transition to our panel of how do we help folks not even have this kind of debt that causes the stress that they're in, but allows them to have higher education. So we will be right back with our next panel. Thank you so much. Hello, and welcome back. It's like we went on the world's shortest commercial break ever. And you'll see in a moment that I'm joined by a whole new set of incredibly talented, thoughtful leaders in the space of higher education in this country. Our next panel is pivoting from talking about relief for current borrowers to let's just not let us all get into the situation to begin with. That's my shorthand way of our truth talk about the way right now that we put all the risk on students for financing their own education and training. And I'm excited about this next conversation because I am joined by Gary Brahm, who's the Chancellor of Brandman University, Ajita Menon, on my far left down there, the former Special Assistant to the President for Higher Education Policy. Please try to say that many times and not take a breath. But super experience in the federal government and elsewhere about what we do about this. And Fedora Galasso, right there in the middle, who's the Southern Director for Young Invincibles, thinking deeply about what is the state aspect on higher education. let's just get into this. So you guys heard the last panel. Adam, who was just so honest with us, which was such a gift to us about what it is like right now to need the higher education, to need the degree, to need the training, to get the job, but the burden that it's putting on him financially, mentally, in all other ways that we are losing creativity and innovation in not just young people, but other people, right? We also did some good truth busting, myth busting, truth telling rather, about what is it really like to be a student in the US right now and who does that look like? I would love to hear a little bit from your perspective, guys, if it's different or more. And Gary, especially thinking about your students, of who do you see as, and I'm not going to call them non-traditional anymore, what is our now student? And where do you think that student, describe that student in the next 10, 15 years?
Sure. So yeah, you call them the new traditional students.
Thank you, the new traditional. That is a phrase we coined on our stage.
There you go.
It's ours.
And so it is the students that are actually working and going to school. In the past, it's been an older group that maybe had some college and wasn't successful, realized they needed it. But now it's becoming a younger group, a lot of community college transfers. There's a big program in California to support community college students getting their AA and then moving over. So they're more traditional aged,
Okay.
but they're going to school while they're working.
Yep.
And so, and everything is done so that they can go to school while they're working. So that then obviously they can earn enough money to live.
Right.
They don't have to borrow that. Maybe they'll get some benefits from their employer. So I would say that the new non-traditional, the new traditional student,
the new norm
is going to be people who are working. And so the question is, well, we all had the 4 years in my group. I'm a little bit before the Invincibles. Were able to go to a traditional institution and spend that time. Well, are you better off spending that time working and getting an education? Does that prepare you for grad school more than going to living in a dorm and doing that?
Right.
I think a lot of us will find that is the case.
Yeah.
So I would expect that people are going to be working more while going to school, and the new traditional is going to be a younger group.
Interesting. What do you see, Fedora, in your work in Texas about the new traditional? Is that what we just said? The new traditional student.
Yeah, so I think that we see that new traditional student. Most of the students that we work with are, either working full-time and taking classes in the evening or juggling 4 different jobs in order to make ends meet and also get actually high-quality experience. Most of them are taking jobs that actually don't lead toward a career path. And even if they are in, get some type of assistance, such as a work-study program or something like that, the jobs that they're in aren't actually work-based learning opportunities because they are, filing in a room or something like that. We also see a lot of people, not students, a lot of young people that don't want to go to a 4-year college and may not even want to go to a community college, and they would prefer to do a technical certificate or something like that, or an apprenticeship program in order to work and learn at the same time.
Interesting.
Student parents in Texas, we have 1/4 of our population of our students is student parents.
Okay.
And they're taking longer to complete, or they're just not completing. Adam was lucky enough to come back to school, but the majority of young people that we see that are in debt, that are defaulting in their debt, are not actually completing school.
So what I'm hearing from you guys, again, my expertise is around the balance sheets of America's households, not around education and education policy. So let me see if I can translate this and tell me if I'm right or wrong in my interpretation. I feel like we are sitting on a legacy system of how to do higher education that looked like someone like Gary or me, right, that had the luxury of these 4 years. I mean, I did have student loan debt, but I still got the 4 years. Got it done in a financing system that's overlaying the institutional instruction that also looks like what Gary or I did, but that is entirely legacy and wrong, perhaps. But we still have it everywhere in thousands and thousands of colleges for what our new traditional student is. Ajita, tell me, as an expert in this area, which I am certainly not, is this right? Is this the right way to think about what we are trying to solve for, these mismatched systems, or what is your take on this?
I think that's absolutely right. But I'll point out one other thing.
Yeah.
While new entrants into education are skewing younger, but their circumstances look differently than cohorts or generations past, the one group that we haven't talked about yet is those who are in the workforce now, who are going to be affected or face the greatest risk through technological advancement, things like automation, changes in the economy that are happening rapidly, dynamically, and shifting the skills requirements. And I mention those because it's pointing to something else that our legacy system is not prepared for, and that is really the kind of resiliency that's needed to be responsive to an individual needing to educate themselves and upskill throughout their lifetime.
That's right.
So not only is it not built for the traditional aged student, but new traditional student entering, right out of high school or a few years out of the workforce, we're talking about a whole group of people that we're going to need to find ways to support to upskill.
That's right.
Going
so
forward.
This like phrase, lifelong learning, that used to be this thing that was like, I want to keep reading books or go to lectures, is like, as a practical matter, a way we will all stay employed and be part of a workforce that can compensate our lives and get the kind of earnings we need. So I'm trying to really, again, suss out this issue for my friends who are watching in, who are probably more on the financial security side of things and the education policy side of things because they're in our networks, that this matters, that these systems are sort of mismatched and not recognizing all these different kinds of students, because learners are borrowing now for this kind of education that is not particularly well responding to the changes in the labor market and the changes in their needs. And so the debt people could be potentially taking on or are now, it isn't even going to necessarily pay off for them, right? So that's how these things connect back to how do we make this more affordable and the debt folks have. So there's a part about making it more affordable that isn't just about the systems we have now, but maybe thinking about what are more efficient, effective systems, right? So I'm curious, Gary, I'd love to hear your take on what do we do about this affordability problem for students going forward? Is it a question of financing the schools we have now, or what are your ideas about your vision of the frontier of the schools we need?
Sure. Schools that are really...
And maybe I shouldn't say schools, there's a whole new way to even think about it. It's my terrible shorthand.
Sure. There are a number of things that we are doing in that regard. We're really focused on cost because cost is access. So we haven't increased tuition at the undergraduate level for over 6 years. We work very closely with community colleges so that students can go there. And in California, I think about 40% of community college students go for free.
Right.
And so they can go from community college and get a job and work and earn a degree for those last 2 years. So that's very efficient. But we're also working with a company called Guild and doing it ourselves as well, where employers are providing free degree programs.
Wow.
Walmart is doing it for their employees. If it's free, it's $1 a day actually at Walmart for an undergraduate degree in business and IT for all of their employees, full-time and part-time. Disney is doing it for their hourly employees, whether it be undergraduate or graduate degrees.
Okay.
Discover's doing it. Others are doing it. Starbucks has done it.
Yep.
So employers recognize that this investment can result in reduced turnover and actually pay for itself. We are
connected to our other conversation about there's the part of dealing with the debt and the part of
exactly
how do we actually do the front end so people don't have to put out the money to begin with.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's really important. We are also doing a new form of education called competency-based education.
Okay.
It's self-paced online education. It's very efficient. It's done in a way where students pay based upon subscription model, meaning they'll pay a certain amount every 6 months. The faster they go, the lower it costs. All of our programs, competency-based or not, are done using backwards design. So we start with what do employers want, what's important for our graduates to have and be able to do, to be able to get a job, retain a job, get a promotion. And so again, it's very efficient and allows people who don't control their own schedule, because it's self-paced, to be able to have the time to earn their degree while they're still working in fields where they have a lot of variability in their schedules and they have family obligations typically as well.
So Gary, I'm hearing about the cost issue, a couple things. One, that we can reduce costs by employers taking a share they used to have, frankly, in helping people with training and education. That was a thing that did exist in our country at one point. But also just thinking about new models of doing the education through this competency base that's also subscription and self-paced. It's so interesting so that, one, you might be getting a degree or towards a degree at the end that has more value in the marketplace, so the cost is dealt with because you're earning more right after, or it's just also costing less up front because of the way you can deliver it.
Exactly. And to add one other little nuance, you'll get like little badges to demonstrate mastery as you move through the program. Those actually can add value to you as you're earning your degree.
Interesting.
And enables you to benefit financially from potentially promotions or new jobs.
That's right.
Even before you earn the degree.
You're earning
you're getting value as you go.
That's right. Ajita, I'm wondering, what do you think this cost issue, which is at the heart of it, is the federal government's role here? Like, what do you see as Department of Ed's in both the frontier work, but also these existing systems around cost?
I think a big part of that is we have to create conditions for that kind of responsible innovation to occur.
Yeah, so say more about that. This seems very important.
What I mean is, I believe it's the federal government's job to establish baseline standards and to do two things. One is really de-risk the opportunity for individuals, and the second is to ensure that colleges are producing that value. And without having those kinds of table stakes regulatory efforts, which we tried to do a lot in the last administration, have recently been rolled back, if you guys are tracking that.
Yep.
Are a very just basic thing that needs to happen and should happen also because the federal government is underwriting the capital that flows into the post-secondary system. But when I say responsible innovation, I do mean that we have to measure and think about the outcomes. So we've often had two sides of things. The sort of protectionist side in post-secondary education that has said it has to be the four-year model, it has to be one way.
Right.
And the traditional innovators who have said we sort of have to break all the glass and we have to have, really radical new ways of doing things. And I think it's something in between. We need to be open and brave and willing to understand how we can create value for employers, for individuals, and in a way that the education institutions can respond to. But we also need to be conscious of whether that's really making good on that promise or that model. And we have to make sure that the models are not novelties, but that they're coherent in a system. So when we talk about things like badges, one of the most critical things about badges is ensuring that the skills mastery has a labor market value.
Yes.
So that when we're talking about people either collecting badges or other types of credentials, what we're actually talking about is how do people demonstrate their skills in a way that is honored by the market.
Right, that the market actually respects so that we aren't, again, creating sort of different tiers where, I'll just use me, so we're not creating a poor Adam situation with Gary here, but I get the four-year education and somehow that's still more valuable than what is actually a very valuable experience of the capability. I'm sorry, now I'm not saying the name right. The
competency-based.
Competency, sorry, thank you. See, I already gave my disclaimer that was like, I am not an education policy person. I am doing my best. That's really fun.
You're doing great, by the way.
Pardon?
You're doing great, by the way.
Thank you. I needed that encouragement at this moment. But Ajita, I want to sit with you for a little bit more on this around how do you think that the standardizing and the regulation, some of the stuff we don't see happening in education now about, the federal government is essentially the largest funder of higher education because of the financial aid system. And they are not really holding universities accountable for what the outcomes are for students, and essentially the money the federal government and I as a taxpayer and I as a borrower are investing in these universities. How do you think that'll impact cost?
I think it can have a really strong impact on cost, especially if it's paired with transparency.
Okay.
So I think a big part of the challenge, and this is true in why we see degree creep in the employer marketplace on the demand side, that employers increasingly require a four-year BA for things that could be done without it. It's because they don't have good proxies for quality or good proxies for skills.
Okay.
But to back up to your question a little bit, essentially, I think it is really, really important that going forward, there is a way for us to both assess those outcomes and then also for that to be a condition of participation in the loan program. That I think in the student aid program, I think what has been difficult to this point is we haven't really allowed for the flexibility in the regulations that allow for new models to test and to iterate and to improve upon what they're doing
Yeah.
in ways that measure that outcome. If we can do those two things, if there can be clear, coherent information between the supply side of the market and the demand side of the market,
Right.
in terms of the skills and whether those skills are truly rewarded by the market, that has a pressure on cost.
Yes, that totally makes sense.
And and I think part of the way that it does that is because then individuals, students, and consumers really understand and have an actual choice set. It's not a choice set based on who markets the best.
That's right.
And so I think all of those pieces have to be in place, and government has a very important role to play in ensuring all sides of that marketplace work.
Fedora, what do you think? One, I'd love your reactions to any of this. This is like totally blowing my mind. It's a really cool conversation. I wish I was in your world more often because of how directly it relates to cost and financing. What are your thoughts about, I know your work has been in the state around what the role state government can play, so I'd be curious to what you think the state's role in something like this could be, but also in thinking about the institution's role in cost, like the higher education institution's role in cost. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on what are solutions around decreasing cost here?
Yeah, I think the problem is multifaceted, so the solutions are varied, and they should come at all angles, kind of like what you said. But I think there are a lot of, like in Texas specifically, there has been state disinvestment in our higher education system. So there has not been increased funds from the state of Texas to assist with higher education costs.
Yep.
Coupled with a federal disinvestment, and the fact that in Texas their tuition rates aren't capped, we have these problems of, again, tuition costs rising and the student having to bear the burden of that. Institutions play a really large part, one with helping to educate the students about their options, as well as to to help them navigate the systems in a better way.
Yep.
What we found, we've been doing focus groups with young people across the state, and what we find from young people is that the majority of them don't understand their options on how to access financial aid. So a lot of young people are leaving a lot of money on the table with not applying for the FAFSA. We have a new law that passed in Texas where FAFSA is mandatory, but that's only in a few states. And
what does that mean it's mandatory?
Like that you have to
sort of as part of your application process to the school, you fill it out.
Yeah, that you have to complete your FAFSA application. A lot of people think that they either don't qualify, or that potentially they could get in trouble. We have a lot of issues around immigration. So there's a lot of education that's lacking, both on the front end and on the back end. I don't know about any of you out there, but when you clicked on that promissory master thing, it wasn't very clear, and there wasn't a lot of information on how to actually prevent default or anything like that. So I agree with you around consumer education, and there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that we can do. If we can't have a large influx in state investment, there are ways to expand resources for young people, expand open education resources. Textbook costs are one of the biggest things that we hear about, and so the ability to have a free textbook that's online and usable is something that is really huge for young people in Texas. And so I'm just giving a few examples of how we can be innovative even with policy, because I do think
that can layer over the system that we have right now, because it'll take some time to build sort of the higher education system of the future.
Correct.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm just thinking a lot about is, as you guys are talking, is the kind of diverse system and set of choices we're going to need for learners going forward, either because of the labor market, in 10 years, Aspen no longer wants me because a robot can write my policy papers and moderate this panel better than I can, and so I need a new skill. Or young people who don't think four-year college is what, they need. I have people in my family for whom, I wish there was a different thing for them to do, because it actually doesn't make sense financially, but they have skills that they could take. Or just these other ways of learning that are more responsive to the market, even for folks just entering. I'm just trying, that is a very diverse, complex system to imagine, or am I overthinking it? Is it possible that we'll get there? How do you think about kind of then the diverse kind of financing that folks need? How to afford this kind of different learning over time in your life? I didn't prep you all for this question, but I'm just actually really startled by the kinds of chances we need to take on a whole new way of thinking about higher education and truly lifelong skills learning. So this is sort of open because I didn't prep you?
I think, well, one positive shift that's occurred that's a place to build upon is you've seen a number of employers, particularly in the tech center, Chegg, who was on the panel before, a number of others, who have eliminated the BA requirement. And mostly they've done that because they are addressing a lack of diversity in the talent pipeline into tech. And the purpose of doing so is also because they were dissatisfied with the fact that the BA itself wasn't the thing that was going to actually give me
wasn't a very good
any
indicator.
information about whether somebody could actually perform the job. And these kinds of actions, these signal-bearing actions that show that employers are interested in what you can do and what you know, and what you can learn, not just a proxy for those things, I think is a really positive development. And I think it's one in which an individual has greater agency to carry the skills that they have with them.
Right.
So then it becomes a question of, how do I talk about my skills? How do I market my skills? How do educational institutions, continue to validate my skills? But the big question for me in terms of whether the traditional marketplace will really embrace these kinds of changes, and not just folks like Gary and Paul at Southern New Hampshire and other folks are on the kind of frontier of this, is will other institutions honor that to bridge learning for higher skills level? And that's an area where I feel like the government could play a compelling role. I feel that accreditors should be playing a more progressive role, because it's necessary for the learner. Like, if we're actually saying we want to be student-centered, then we have to acknowledge not just the different challenges that students face, but also the different assets they bring to the table, and honor and value those learning and those skills in a portable way.
Right.
So there's a lot of interesting stuff happening with kind of transcripting, with new resumes, new ways of doing these things that are really about building agency and autonomy for the learner.
That's fascinating.
It's shifting a mindset from, I don't know if you've, something interesting that is appalling to me is a number of institutions still have a policy where they won't release your transcripts if you have a small balance due.
Right.
Late fee, anything. And I mention that one in particular because it's my learning, right? I graduated from the institution. I did all the work. I took all the classes. I have all the knowledge. My grades. Those are mine. And so the idea that somehow there's just a fundamental difference in between how people view learning, and there's a willingness for some employers to step up and say, no, we're actually gonna think about the skills that people have, the skills people want. I think that's how we start to establish greater coherence.
Yeah, I will let Ajita grab some water right next to her.
Sorry.
No, please. And Gary, what's on your mind about this?
There's already things like boot camps available where people can go for 6 months up to a year and be able to get a job right from there. There's a lot of certificates. We work with Microsoft and CompTIA. They offer various kinds of certificates, and one of our Bachelor of Information Science competency-based program will give credit for those certificates. So once those people who have those certificates are working, and then they want to move up into management, and then they need something more than a certificate, they can use that for credit to then get a bachelor's degree. So they can move on from there. So there's a lot of work being done to give opportunities to people who do enter the workforce in that way to continue on, because very specific skills are helpful for getting your first job, but you may want to move up further into management, and then additional skills, whether they be just focused on management or an entire degree, would be helpful.
Yeah. Fedora, anything on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of things that can be done on the front end, not just focusing on the employer, but thinking about the actual person as a whole person, and, the policy levers that we have to make sure that young people can complete their degree and also have a degree that actually will matter, and a skill and a job that will actually help them to thrive, not just survive. So, just making sure that young people have access to healthcare, reproductive healthcare, and mental health care are the two things that young people use the most of. We said that 1/5 of students are student parents, so increasing access to childcare. There's the C Campus bill, we can increase further increase the funding for that at the national level.
Can you say what that is?
Child Care Access Means program, and but it funds a school-based childcare essentially.
Okay.
And there are a lot of different things about that, but really making sure that we have the supports and services for young people that actually help them to navigate school. Food, there's a lot of food insecurity that affects young people these days and inhibits them from actually concentrating or being able to complete their degree. And then throughout the college experience, making sure that the experiences that they get are actually applicable to their work. So internships that matter, creating work-based learning opportunities, which will also create the need for a lot more communication and collaboration among the different entities that often act as if they're very separate from the K through 12 to higher education and the workforce. They all act like they're different, but it's literally just one person moving through a cycle. And so I think it's often a lot of disparate levers instead of thinking about them in a very holistic approach. And then finally, creating those other opportunities for people who would like to do and have an alternate approach, and having a more systematic way for people to participate in an apprenticeship program or a CTE program and have that be a valid way for them to actually get a career path forward.
So I want to capture some of what we've all talked about here, because then I'm going to ask you guys what you're most excited about. Like, what are you most enthusiastic about that will deal with the front end part of this problem so that we don't have kids, young people, older people, old people wasn't right, I apologize everyone, but a range of people in different parts of their life cycle struggling with student loan debt like we do now. We talked about new kinds of programs, like just rethinking, right, how we do higher education learning or post-secondary learning, how that can help with pricing and competition, the role of government, kind of regulation and creating transparency. I think, Fedora, it was you who brought up decision-making of borrowers, not to put the onus back on them and the burden, but that we do not have a system for how it's complex the financial choices you're making are. We do not have actually a set of good advisors for borrowers on what those choices should be and how to make them. We spent a bit of time talking about employers as funders of higher ed, which I think is super interesting, especially as it connects to our prior conversation of employers as payer backers of higher ed, the beneficiaries of my education. Do you want to pay me for a little bit of it? So, there's a lot going on. We didn't even get to like what are income sharing agreements that I know Ajita has strong feelings about, which is super interesting of if it's good or bad and what we're learning from it. And these issues of, again, if I have to keep going back and learning every 5 to 10 years and I'm going to work 60 plus years of my life, it clearly can't be something where I have $60,000 of debt every time, right? So what area, like in our Aspen world around building leadership, it's a lot of what is exciting someone the most. Like truly, you've got to kind of feel it in your heart that this is to go from being someone in one of my colleagues yesterday said, our work is about going from being successful in your career to having significance in your career. Like, what did you do to bring to the world something different and better, which all of you are doing. You're already in the significance place. So from your perspective from that, I'd love to know, like, what is exciting you every day about not creating another $1.6 trillion of debt that is actually not getting young people and borrowers into the labor market in the right place and not letting them fully fulfill like the promise they have to our country. So Ajita, which part is not keeping you up at night but waking you up every morning?
Yeah, I think it's two things. One is I'm excited by the new models, but I'm also excited by efforts to bring employers together as a constituency at the table. So part of understanding how we make this transformation to a new skills-based economy that providers are responding to has very much everything to do with the nature of how we how they become a stakeholder in the education system, and I think that's going to be very important.
Yeah.
The other thing that excites me a lot is ways to do that in the public sector.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent a lot of my time doing work with community colleges, primarily in California, and they are on the frontier of some very interesting work that really connects things that are happening in individual parts of campuses to local labor market context, regional labor market context. And I think those are the kinds of models and approaches that are really exciting to me. I spent a lot of time doing regulatory activity. So I did 2 rounds of gainful employment regulation at the federal level, a number of other things on the transparency side. But I'm loving right now this space of folks who are pushing understanding what the problem is and then cultivating new solutions to be responsive to that.
Starting with the problem,
yes,
building out
and
from
building
there.
out from
Who
there.
knew
And
that was the way to do it?
Starting with what I'm now acclimatized to say because I've moved to the Bay Area is the user perspective, right?
Yes,
this idea that we are talking about students as the primary and individuals who don't yet identify as students that we want to be students, and really designing models that fit their lives.
Right.
That's the most exciting
Both financial
thing.
models and learning models first, but the financial models that follow.
And doing it in the public sector, I think, is critically important because it is an immediate opportunity for scale.
Yeah.
And I think it is also the thing where the government can easily, not easily because that in and of itself is challenging, but has the greatest potential for to reach more individuals.
That's right. And look, we have an entire history of our country that's about what is the public what is the public good around education. Fedora, just one thought of, again, what's waking you up every morning being like, we can do this.
Yeah, so what energizes me every day to come to work is the young people that I work with every day, and the ability to amplify their voices in this process. And to take the burden off of just the young people to having to, assume the burden of, debt and their responsibility. In Texas, we were able to pass a bill that where we used to have a law where your license would be revoked if you went into student loan default, so making you not be able to work.
Right,
so
essentially taking away your opportunity to earn. Yeah.
Correct. And then we have a lot of good, exciting things that are happening both in California and Colorado with creating a student borrow bill of rights. Young Invincibles and our young adult leaders have been leading the way and paving that path forward to ensure that we are actually putting young people and borrowers at the forefront and making sure that their rights are protected and that they're not going to be caught up in or having to bear the burden of this very flawed and troublesome system that we're in right now.
Thank you. That's awesome. So I don't know, Gary, are you going to go along this theme of the bright spot for the future is centered by, the real experiences of learners? Is that what's going to drive you to the future that you want to see? Or what is, I'm teasing with you, but I'm quite interested as someone who is running a higher education institution, thinking from this in all different angles. Where is your heart and excitement in this?
Well, we're very excited about work with employers for free degree programs.
Yeah.
We think that's huge. Obviously, people like Walmart, Disney, Discover, others, provide opportunities for education that people wouldn't have otherwise. Debt-free, no-cost debt-free, not even the books.
Right.
So that's it's a big deal. So the question is, does that become the next major employer benefit? Mm-hmm. And there's a chance it might. Competency-based education, because it's so affordable, helps facilitate that. And of course, being self-paced allows people to do it, in spite of schedules that they don't control. So does this form of higher education become a choice for people right out of high school?
Yep.
Do they decide, I'm going to get a job at Walmart or Disney or Discover, and I'm going to get my bachelor's degree there and then decide what I want to do for grad school, if I want to go to grad school at all? Is that the best prep for your career? And can you do that without any debt, without any cost?
Yeah.
So I think that's really exciting. I think it's still in the process of developing, and it could end up being a very, very big deal.
I love thinking about that in the context. We're doing work on what is the 21st century of benefits for workers to thrive, and you've got this down on my list. I love this. Look, this has been awesome. I already feel like what a treat to let me into your world. And I feel like there's so much to do together on all of this and how to make it work. I'm really grateful for you, Gary, Fedora, and Ajita for sharing your brains and your passion with us. I hope all of you that have been watching out there have been inspired by the leadership we're seeing, the really cool ideas we're seeing. Please give us feedback, let us know about it, and how you need to connect to these folks. And on Monday, September 30th, in partnership with Young Invincibles, we're going to be doing a Twitter chat, tweet storm, Twitter chat, all about these issues. So join us. Some of our partners who have been part of this hour-long conversation will be there. We'd love to hear your thoughts. We want to know what you guys as borrowers, as learners, as future learners like myself need from this system and need to be able to afford it. So thank you again. We've really enjoyed having this conversation.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you guys. That was awesome.